Hi, it's Lex again, and here we are with another episode of the Azure On Air podcast. We are still at Integrate. It's close to the final sessions of the day, and I have with me my fellow Dutchman, Steef Jan. Well, actually, we know each other for such a long time, right?
Yes,
Really,
that's true. That's stemming all the way back from the early days of BizTalk. So yeah,
exactly.
Coming close to 20 years probably.
Yeah. 2004, 2006, along those lines.
I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe before we move to the actual topic, maybe you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Steef Jan, like Lex said, I'm a fellow Dutchman. I've been in integration space ever since I changed my career in 2000 from being a lab technician. So I was doing biotechnology and biochemistry lab stuff, worked on medicine, that kind of stuff, and I just changed careers and straight away got into backend systems with IBM mainframes, and then of course web services came along, and then ultimately in 2010 the cloud was announced while I was doing a lot of BizTalk, and then ultimately ended up in the cloud as well. So yeah, I've been around in the integration space, predominantly backend. I don't like really front end and all that stuff, but yeah, connecting systems together and doing what I do today. So yeah. BizTalk in the early days, now it's Azure Integration Services.
Azure Integration, of course.
Yeah.
Oh, so you've also done mainframes?
I've done mainframes because back in the day, I have Vion Food, so that's a butcher kind of way in Boxtel, you probably know that as well. I was using a lot of mainframes because a lot of information was still in there, a lot of business processes as well. And host integration in combination with BizTalk. So I've done that. So there was mainframes involved, but also at the KLM. I was an intern back then in 2000. Building applications Visual Basic, but also basically within a middle layer you were talking to mainframes as well. So I've kind of touched a lot of things. So
long gone. Yeah. Actually, that was also one of my first integration projects. I wasn't officially an integrator, but I worked back then in a hospital in The Hague, and they also had mainframes for their hospital information system. So I built an integration between WordPerfect and use skyscraping, screen scraping, of course, to write letters to GPs.
I'm kind of familiar with screen scraping, but I was also at the KLM and the mainframe, so you had to put in entries, and then entry went in the mainframe, and then it was all back. You do a screen scraping, but some guys built common library to support that screen scraping. Later in life, you probably noticed too, we come back to this robotic process automation. I think the RPA capability you got in the Power Automate. So
correct.
It all comes back again.
Yeah, that's indeed that's a nice part, and this just so understandable, right? I mean, back then the investments have been huge. You're really talking about millions for one organization alone, and you don't just want to bin it, right? So, and that's also what we've seen a couple of years ago when we had Paul Larsen here also at Integrate. He was talking about connectivity between logic apps and mainframe. So really two opposites from time perspective. So there was.
Yeah, but I think still some of the big banks are using mainframes. I think Stephen Milan referred to it. I think somewhere he's in Luxembourg, but he referred something to mainframes and banking. So I think some of the mainframes still exist. Like you said, they use investment. It's kind of hard to move those along the chain towards maybe potentially even a cloud, if it's allowed to be in the cloud at all.
Exactly. If it's allowed alone. Banks, insurance companies, that kind of organizations. That kind of brings us to the topic that we wanted to discuss for today. That's about migrating kind of on-premise systems, not like a BizTalk integration platform, but other, let's say, third-party systems, and also bring them to the cloud via a migration a project. Let's put it like that, project. And you have some experience with it, and that's also the session.
True.
What you're going to talk about tomorrow.
Yes, that's correct.
Are you still working there? It's a real
company? Kind of what it was. There was an on-premise solution called New Way. That's kind of a message broker solution, but it was homegrown by a certain third party. Similar to like BizTalk, so there's like a PubSoc mechanism. There's a database under the hood. There's a kind of a canonical capability feature in there too. Something that you and I also know from BizTalk Server. That was kind of becoming old, not supported. People that used to build on that product were gone. Some of the business rules were not up to date, and they kind of wanted to move to the cloud because some of their assets were in the cloud too. So their financial capability, which is Dynamic 365, was already in the cloud. And they also wanted to move that integration capability to the cloud as well, to also start connecting also with other systems that were also being pushed to the cloud, or talk maybe to third parties. So basically they wanted to modernize their integration broker. So they came up to me eventually. I was working for another company back then, and they said, hey, you know, we've seen you do some implementation at another retailer using Azure Integration Services. So we kind of want you to do something similar, and then also maybe try to get more visibility in your business process as well from, you know, all our integration, because the visibility or observability wasn't that great as well. So we started that kind of 3 years ago, and we are here there today with a complete integration platform using Azure Integration Services, supporting all their interfaces, so nothing runs through that old ESB anymore. We call it an ESB or new way. It's all running in the cloud now, using all Azure Integration Services capabilities, like or at least the components like logic apps, I would say also functions, API management, storage, and messaging capabilities. So yeah, that's what I'm going to talk about tomorrow more for the live audience. Yeah. But yeah, it's been a process for 3 years. So it's not like it's that easy, because first you start setting up the platform, and then the next step is kind of migrating those interfaces. But you're never going to do this in a big bang. You're going to start small. We kind of cut things up in domains. So we said, okay, these are article interfaces. So that has to do with your or products basically in Dynamics. So the products will go to POS systems and other systems. So it's kind of a master data management type of solution. So we started with that first, and then followed up by pricing, and then with order flows, and et cetera, et cetera. And we slowly migrated that, and then also start learning about, you know, how this interfacing works and how we can make it observable and going forward. So and we're talking about 50 or 60 interfaces, but that took us like 2.5 years. Yeah. But in the process as well, while the landscape started evolving and new business requirements came in, we also built new interfaces leveraging similar principles we use for those interfaces. So
yeah, and also technology's changed.
True. You kind of have to benefit from the evolution of services as well. And what we kind of agreed upon initially is like, we'll look at each of the interfaces and see what's fit for purpose. Yeah. So not deviate, saying everything has to be a logic app or everything has to go this way. Every time we evaluating what's the best approach for an interface, and also looking back at other interfaces, learn from that and implement that. So we start to find out that some of the things we did was kind of similar code. So then you start thinking about reuse, and then you're using the packaging capability, making a shared package, using that artifact capability in Azure DevOps, and then using that shared package over your services, because you start to find out that certain things are similar, and then you want to do the reuse. You just don't want to have all that code duplicated in all your interfaces.
True. Yeah.
So,
yeah, that would be a pity.
A lot of the things that you know as well, reuse, that kind of stuff.
Of course. Yeah.
It all comes back, but now it's being packaged as a solution in Azure using Azure Integration Services.
Yeah. So when you started that migration process, you already mentioned a couple of the entities that have been migrated.
Yeah.
But did you start with the less critical?
That's true, because orders, for instance, was pretty critical, because like order is the primary driver for retailers, because orders come in, then they are made financial in the dynamic system, and then they're distributed to the warehouse managed system, then being picked, and then, you know, the packaging slip comes back, and then the invoices go out. So it's kind of the process, but order is very critical. That needs to be available 24/7 almost, because ordering at this retailer is just almost like a 24/7 process. So they order in the morning, during the day, in the evening. So it's only between, I would say, 12 in the evening and 4 in the morning that nothing really happens. But other than that, you know, it's a pretty critical flow. So you're right. We didn't decide to do the critical one. We decided, let's just start with articles. That's just the articles is just distribute them, and you can, it's controllable. It's kind of a batch type process, because you do it early in the morning. You kind of distribute all that data to its subscribing systems, and then you're done, and you can really influence that, or you can fix it. But ordering is a different, you know, process. Yeah. So we started with the articles, and then the articles went fine. We learned a lot about it. Then we thought, you know, we might as well do the pricing, because that's kind of master data management type too. Just distribute the prices almost to all the same subsystems. And from articles, we went to assortment. So assortment is also affiliated with articles. then we did some of the generic stuff, and slowly, because we learned more, in a year and a half or so, we're like, okay, we feel confident enough to start also doing the order process and migrate that to Azure.
Yeah. And now everything is live.
Yeah, and in the meantime, new requirements came on because the retailers, the retailer, at least food retail, is a brick and mortar store, but they start thinking about other revenue streams. So something could be like online. You probably be familiar with online too, like an Albert Heijn or Jumbo. Those are retailers in Holland. Also start to offer their products online. Yeah. But it has to come somewhere. It either can be from a general warehouse management, or it can be from the store itself. So the store, a franchisee, for instance, would then get these orders, online orders in, and they need to distribute that too. So that's one of the things. The other thing is they could maybe start doing a food service or food court, and maybe start do sandwiches. So they prepare those, and then somewhere you can eat those. So like Albert Heijn also has these central places where you can have freshly prepared sushi. Another thing. So newer concepts come into the store to generate more revenue for that store, for a franchisee. Some of these retailers or food retailers have these kind of franchisee model. And to make it better for the franchisee means that it's also better for what's called the holding. Yeah. Another vending machine is another an example where you can do some stuff in their products, and those products will give higher margins. So that's another revenue stream. And the other thing you can think of even today is platform economies. So you would support Uber Eats. So you make those sandwiches, and then the sandwiches are being picked up by this Uber Eats driver, or maybe Thuisbezorgd. That's what it's called. It's similar to Uber Eats. Yeah. And then it's being delivered to where it's being delivered to. So that's another revenue stream. And then finally, and that's something with more fresh products, you have something else called an intelligent fridge. So this franchisee can stock a intelligent fridge with, let's say, freshly prepared wraps, let's say milk bottles, something you will drink, and you can get those out of your let's say intelligence fridge. And again, that's another revenue stream. Yeah. So what I'm trying to make the point is that while I was there, a lot of the developments are taking place within the traditional, I would say, food retail store, or food retail like the 7-Eleven. So it's more like becoming more of an extended convenience store instead of just selling products. And they need these new revenue stream, because the thing is that, and you know this probably too, that the governments are not so keen on cigarettes and stuff. So in Holland they had bringing in new policies with the fact that food retailers, Albert Heijn's and Jumbo's and all these, cannot sell tobacco anymore. So the only ones that can do it is express stores within a gas station, but that will ultimately disappear too, and then the only place you can get is a specialized tobacco store. So some of that revenue is gone, and that was also the driver for getting different revenue streams. But also meant that for us, we had to build all kinds of new interfaces and solutions also with Azure Integration Services. So, so besides the migration and building up that platform, also new integrations come. Yeah. But with the flexibility we have, and the proven interfaces we build, we could extend our platform with new interfaces as well.
And that's really what happened, right? I mean, the moment that the business comes in and says to you as a product owner that they want new revenue. That's nothing new. That's very understandable. But they also want to use a new platform. Yeah. There's also an indication that they have confidence that, at least as a company, the right decision has been taken to go for that platform, right?
That's true. When we did this, we also did a business case with Microsoft, revealing the fact that we're moving to Azure Integration Services. And one of the people there, like the product owners, said that, within this platform we can do new stuff. So it's called, Spar is ready for the future. So Spar, that's one of the retailers I worked for, food retailers, said, well, hey, we believe in this platform because going forward we can do multiple things, like these new revenue streams. And he already saw that coming. He saw, if we want to be flexible and build this and using the composability with what the Azure platform offers, because all these servers are kind of Lego bricks, it can lead to the solutions that we want. While with the old platform, they only had like a very rigid platform that couldn't do much for them anymore. So.
Static on-premise. Maybe the maintenance.
Yeah, and outdated, and
exactly.
So they wanted to revamp and remodernize everything in the cloud, but also have everything documented and update some of the rulings. So that depends on A good example is, for instance, SAP, which means it's for plastics that needs to be added on too. And that's something we incorporated in the interface as well, which is way more easier than, with the old platform, because there were no developers left. You could say, okay, we have this requirement, but because lack of people, it will take a very long lead time to get that implemented.
Exactly.
While with the Azure platform, and you have a team that's already built some of the interfaces, you can then easily uptake that requirement and get it to execution and get some value out of it quicker than depending on an old platform.
Yeah, just like nowadays, it's hard to get a BizTalk developer, for example.
True.
Probably, with the new day system that you mentioned.
The new way is going to be hard too, because the developers kind of were already out of the company or retired somehow.
Retired maybe.
And I think with BizTalk, I wouldn't say it, like Nino said, Sandro said, it's not going to die. Now, I'm pretty sure it's not going to die early or not, within a couple of years. But there's less and less BizTalk people. And also on that platform, you're a little bit more rigid. So if you want to have more flexibility, then Azure Integration Services definitely can offer that.
Sure.
And if you migrate from BizTalk to Azure Integration Services, the approach would be similar. You just take a few of those interfaces, try out how you want to solve that in Azure, and as soon as you find the right model or think, this is going to work, then you slowly migrate everything else. But I can imagine that if you have thousands of interfaces on BizTalk, or maybe a couple of hundred, and that investment is pretty much like what we were talked about earlier, like the mainframe, then you get a vast investment in let's say, a BizTalk server. It's going to be a tough nut to crack when it comes to moving that into the cloud, because that means a huge upfront investment, while the functionality might be similar. So that depends. It's going to be quite a number. It's going to be quite an interesting thing if you want to move a large BizTalk installation to Azure. I think I'm pretty sure that it's done. I know there are big companies done it, but there's other companies that still pretty much rely on it. So.
It's not easy to explain to the business that you say, okay, I'm going to move what you currently had to the cloud. It will cost you X million euros or whatever currency, but you will have the same functionality. That's not easy to explain.
And BizTalk does offer with its adapters connectivity with the cloud. Like one of the first was the adapter with the service bus, so you could do at least asynchronous communication. So I've done that pretty early on. So you get those type of hybrid scenarios. And even now with Logic App or what's been talked today, you can even run things on-prem. So it's still like hybrid is also a capability. So you can still have your BizTalk on-prem. So one of the customers I worked for had some of the stuff on-prem. BizTalk was talking to warehouse management systems. But then again, also messages were sent to the cloud and then sent into, let's say, Dynamics, or sent into other, let's say, SaaS solutions in the cloud. So even that hybrid model could work. It works better, I think, asynchronous than synchronous. You're depending a little bit on connectivity. For instance, if you want to do it through on-premise data gateway, it can be challenging because it's a very narrow pipe, I would say. So that can be challenging. On the flip side, though, you could try maybe with an API management in front of your capabilities in Azure, and then talk that with an HTTP adapter with BizTalk. That can be potentially something. So there's still ways of doing that. So hybrid's still there for a long time too. And initially, Microsoft pushing Azure as this is where everyone going to be, but then later on changed that message a bit into I think it's going to be more hybrid. There's things, even like a warehouse management system, that needs to be up and running all the time. It's been fed by the fact that you need to pick certain orders and then out. If a warehouse management system is still, and some of the devices that are connected in that warehouse management system don't operate because they rely on the cloud, and everything comes to a halt. That means that's pretty critical for the business, because if we go back to the retail, food retail, all those stores everywhere around, let's say the Netherlands, they need to be supplied.
No, that totally makes sense. And also, what you see is just like an in-between phase, right? The hybrid model. Just start exploring a little bit with the cloud for easy connectivity, a faster go-to-market, that kind of stuff. Easier, adding business value, at least also faster when compared to when it must be done with BizTalk itself. So that just helps out. I also hear from customers, BizTalk customers, that indeed they are moving to the cloud, but still there are a couple of parts, like the warehouse management system scenario that you described, that is just, or not very easy, to replace that with cloud technologies. So they're still left with a little bit of BizTalk.
True, or maybe going forward there might be solutions like an Azure Stack or something that you can still be disconnected, but you have like your Azure environment on-prem basically, but it could be a costly solution. So on the other end, because there's still hardware and stuff involved, so that's another investment you need to do, and then you just might still wonder, but I've got something now that works. Why do I need to change? And as long as there's going to be support from Microsoft, then on the other end, the customers might still feel comfortable. But it's still like a couple of years, so we might as well wait. But in the end of the day, you have to make some kind of decision. You have to need some kind of roadmap going forward. What are you going to do with your, let's say, on-prem footprint? Whether or not it involves a BizTalk server or it involves other products that are maybe similar. So the ones that I described, the New Way broker or other brokers or other assets that are on-prem. You have to think about it. That's
for sure. Let's see how we're doing on time. We are about to close up.
Okay.
Do you have any final words, any final thoughts, anything?
No, I think we had a good discussion on the migration path. There's one story today by Sandro with the BizTalk. Tomorrow it's going to be a different story, more like a journey in those last 3 years that we have done and building up an integration, let's say, platform, or at least solutions that you can reuse and leverage. I'm not saying that my solution is the best. It's just food for thought. What we use is kind of similar patterns that from integration. So claim check, kind of chaining stuff together. We put in some observability. It's there. It still needs evolution. Even if you build something in the cloud, then ultimately you need to keep evolving. Like today you saw end-to-end monitoring, for instance, a capability that's available now, right, in Azure. So that's something we could leverage too, because we built something ourselves, but maybe we could move that to a more cloud native or Azure native solution. So in the end of the day, also when you start building up that platform, you still need to keep evolving and keep track of what's, the changes, because you can always improve your, let's say, cloud platform or integration platform as well. That will be my final kind of thought as well.
And this also makes total sense, right? I assume you refer to the business process tracking.
Yeah, that's another thing. So that there's always new features in Azure and Azure Integration Services in this case that you can leverage or see, hey, maybe this can replace our current solution, or maybe this is going to be even better, or we can implement this too, because there's a need for end-to-end monitoring or business process tracking as well. So
that makes sense.
And maybe even going forward, there was also a release of business rules. It's not GA yet, but let's say it's GA. Maybe that got capabilities that we can poach upon as well. So and brings value to what we've built. So
exactly. Exactly. Okay. Well, I want to thank you.
Thank you as well.
Good
for having me.